But to achieve this, in your PHP plugin file, you would just say register block type. 90s kid forever, baby. So this is a long video. There's no way around that. And I know there's nothing more annoying than having to scroll through the timeline of a 4-hour-long video to see if it actually has what you're looking for. So before we go any further, here's a review of what's covered in this video. The basic skeleton for creating a WordPress plugin in general, how to create a settings page for your plugin that saves user preferences into the database using the Settings API. We'll learn a bit about localization, or how to make your plugin easy to translate into other languages. We'll learn how to use JavaScript to create Gutenberg or block editor block types. We'll learn how to use React.js and JSX in those block types. We'll learn how to use the official WordPress NPM workflow package that makes working with React and JSX a piece of cake. We'll spend the time to truly understand how WordPress saves the data for each instance of a block into the database. We'll learn how you can use PHP if you want to make your block types truly dynamic. And finally, we'll talk about when it makes sense to use custom post types to store data for your plugin versus when it's a good idea to instead create your own custom database table. So that's what's included in this 4-hour video, but all of this is just an excerpt from 10+ hours of new lessons I just added to my premium WordPress development course. In the full course, we learn even more about plugin development, including how to set up your own admin sidebar menu with your own custom SVG icon, 16 lessons where we build 2 super custom Gutenberg block types together. One is a multiple choice quiz block type that uses React even on the public front end, and the other is called Featured Professor, and it lets you pull in dynamic content from a different blog post just by storing a piece of metadata with the ID of that post. This allows us to create a two-way relationship between the blog post and the featured professor. And even though I'm a huge fan of the plugin called Advanced Custom Fields, I think it's super empowering to be able to create relationships between different posts on our own without having to rely on any other plugin. And finally, in the full course, there are 4 extra lessons at the very end where we do actually go ahead and create our own custom database table and practice writing our own SQL statements. So, if you work through this video and you're still interested and you want to learn more, you can find a super discounted coupon in the description for this video to join my full course at the best price. Having said all of that, I hope this video helps you on your WordPress, your PHP, and your JavaScript journey. Now, enjoy the actual video. Hello everyone. In this video, we're starting a new 3-chapter section of the course that is all about plugin development. Without further ado, let's review what these 3 new chapters are going to be about. So the first chapter will be about PHP. This will cover sort of the traditional skeleton or building blocks of creating a new plugin. The next chapter will be about JavaScript. So we'll create a new block type for the WordPress or Gutenberg block editor. Along the way, we'll learn a little bit about React, but we need to remember that this is a course about WordPress, not React. Meaning we won't cover React as in-depth and at as slow of a pace as we would in my course that's entirely dedicated to React. Okay, and then in the final of these 3 plugin chapters, we'll talk about databases. Specifically, when your plugin needs to store data, we'll talk about when it makes sense to use the WordPress built-in custom post type versus when it makes more sense to use or create your own custom database table. So that's an overview of the 3 chapters, but if you're anything like me, topics or keywords like this aren't that useful. And instead, I prefer to see the real-world result of what we're going to create. So right now, let's look at a quick preview, take a quick look at the finished product of what we're going to build together. So if I visit the blog section of my website and then view the permalink or single view for a post, you can see there's this area called Post Statistics, and it says how many words the post has, how many characters, and about how long it would take to read the post. So this area of content is dynamically being added to this blog post through a plugin. Now let's go into the admin dashboard and look at the settings screen that we'll build for this particular plugin. So under the settings menu in the sidebar, we see this brand new area called word count. If we click on that, we have different options. So you can say if you want the post statistics to be at the beginning or the end of the post. You can change the statistics headline text to be whatever you want. And then you can also check or uncheck which one of these pieces of content you want to include. Okay, so that's the first example plugin that we're going to create together. Let's change gears and look at the second example plugin that we'll create together. So in the admin sidebar, you'll see an entirely new section called Word Filter. It has its own custom icon, and it actually has its own sub-menu, 2 different pages. Let's look at the first page, or just the words list. So here you can include a comma-separated list of words that you don't want to show up on your website or in your blog post content. So for example, if I want to filter out ipsum, right, the second word in lorem ipsum, and then comma, maybe the word tempore. Okay, and then I'll click Save Changes. And then if I go back to the front end of my website, here's a blog post, and if I refresh, notice it filtered out the word ipsum that would have been here and the word tempore that would have been here. Now in terms of what we want this replaced bit of content to be, well, in the sidebar, the submenu for this new plugin, you can click on Options. You could have included this on the previous page, but this is just going to be an example of how to have sub-pages or a sub-menu. So this can be anything you want as the replacement text, or you can just leave it blank and that will entirely remove those filtered words from your content. Okay, so those 2 example plugins that we just looked at, those will be in the first chapter about PHP and just sort of traditional plugin development. Now let's change gears though and talk about the second chapter, which is going to be about JavaScript. In particular, we're going to create a new block type. So let me go edit this post. It's called a new sample post. So if I go into posts, a new sample post. Okay, and let's imagine that maybe after this first paragraph, I want to add a new block. I can use this button. And here we see 2 new block types that you're not used to seeing, quick question and professor callout. So we're going to build both of these together. Let's start with quick question. So if I click on that, you can ask the viewers of your website a question to make sure that they're paying attention. So we could say, what color is the sky on a clear and sunny day? And then you give it multiple options or answers. So we could say orange, add another answer, green, add another answer, blue. And then I'm not sure if you can see it, but there are yellow star outlines, and that's how you can mark which answer is the correct answer. So I'll star the blue answer. Okay, let me go ahead and save or update this post, and then let's view this on the front end of our website. So if I refresh the front end after the first paragraph, cool. And now if I get this question wrong on purpose as a viewer of the article, you can see, sorry, try again. But if I get it correct, that's correct. Cool, and then when it fades back, you can see it sort of lets you know which answers are wrong and marks the correct answer with a green check mark. Also, by default, notice this block has a gray background color, but if we go back into the admin or the edit screen, if I open up the right-hand sidebar, with this block selected, you can choose any color you want. So maybe I'll give it a really sort of light green color. Click Update, refresh on the front end, you can see that's reflected. Cool, so that's the first block type that we'll create together using JavaScript and React and working with the Gutenberg system in WordPress. Let's change gears and look at the second block type that we'll create together. So let me scroll down a bit here. Maybe after this paragraph, I want to show you the next block type. So I'll add this, and it's called Professor Callout. Let's click that, and then you can select a professor that you want to highlight or feature in this blog post. So I'll say Dr. Barks a lot. And now here's the cool part. This is pulling in the real data for Dr. Barks a lot on the fly. So if I save this, this is not hard-coded content that's getting injected into this blog post. Instead, if we ever update the Dr. Barks a lot post in the future, this content within the blog post will automatically get updated. This is made possible by learning how to leverage metadata or post-meta. So instead of using something like advanced custom fields, we can roll up our sleeves and create our own custom solution where you can store a relationship between different pieces of content. Anyways, we'll talk more about this when we actually build this feature, but back on the front end, if I refresh, now you can see below that paragraph, there's a call out to Dr. Barks a lot. And then if you visit Dr. Barks a lot's page, we can show the relationship coming from the other direction, right? So the plugin dynamically adds this little piece of content to the professor permalink, and it's going to find any blog posts that have a relationship with this professor. Okay, once we finish that plugin together, that will wrap up the JavaScript chapter. Now let's change gears and talk about the plugin database chapter. So in this chapter, we're going to add a new section to our website called Pet Adoption. In the pet adoption section, you can see there's going to be 100,000 randomly generated pets. So 100,000 items that need to be stored in the database somewhere. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on. So each pet will have a randomly generated name, species, weight, birth year, hobby, favorite color, and favorite food. Now right about here, you can see how long it took for WordPress to create this page. So if I refresh, every time it's going to be slightly different. But you can see that on average on my computer, it's taking about 0.2 of a second to load the first 100 pets out of the 100,000 items. Now that's not too bad of a speed. However, it gets a lot worse. So this is just a generic query to show us any and all pets. What if instead I only want to see the pets that are of the species cat and only cats that have a favorite hobby of scratching furniture? So if I go up into the address bar and add on $species equals cat and fave hobby equals scratching furniture. Let me scroll down a little bit. So you can see out of the 100,000 pets, there are 805 that match that specific search. However, that took almost a full second to complete. Let me refresh again so we can see sort of an average speed. That took 1.1 seconds. Everything's subjective, but I feel like that's very slow. Now this example that we're looking at right now, this is using custom post types to store the pet data. So each one of these 100,000 pets is a post, right, of the custom post type called pet. And then each one of these custom pieces of data about the pet, that's a piece of meta. Now, when we actually get to this chapter, we'll discuss this in greater detail, but essentially, there are many things that you get for free when you use WordPress custom post types. Every developer has a different opinion, but I believe custom post types are a great idea unless you need to be able to search or query by a piece of metadata. At that point, it gets very inefficient and very slow because, for example, in this tab, we have the exact same 100,000 pets, only now we're no longer using custom post types. In this tab on this site, in this example, I've created my own separate custom database table and I'm writing my own SQL queries. So if I perform the same search, right, if I say only show me where species equals cat and fave hobby equals scratching furniture, you can see if I refresh, that's only taking about 1/10 of a second compared to over 1.1 seconds using the WordPress custom post type solution. So that's somewhere in the ballpark of 10 times faster. Anyways, in this chapter, we'll discuss in detail when it makes sense to use custom post types for your plugin data needs, and when it makes sense to implement your own custom database table like this. We'll also learn how to have this red X to the side so you can delete any one of the pet items. Also, down at the very bottom of this page, there's a form where you can add in a name, and then it will randomly generate all of the other attributes about the pet and add it to the database so that we can practice sort of the basics of CRUD operations using your own custom database table. Okay, so that wraps up the quick preview or the quick look at the finished product of what we're going to build together. At this point, you might be thinking to yourself, but what about topics or features X, Y, and Z in WordPress, like widgets or any of the other 10,000 features in WordPress? Well, these 3 chapters of the course, they're meant to be a guided tour, not an exhaustive encyclopedia of plugin development. WordPress is just too big of a topic with too many different features and APIs, and sort of the whole point of plugins is that the possibilities are infinite, endless. Anything that you can think of that you want to extend or customize in WordPress, you can do that with a plugin. So every single option, every parameter, every action or every filter that we can hook onto, any setting that we can change. Anything is possible with plugins. So it's impossible to cover it all in a course like this. Trust me, the course would become 400 hours long and everyone would lose interest. The idea here is just to show you the core basic building blocks and the most common features that you're going to need to work with in order to build plugins. From there, once you're familiar with these basics, it'll be easy for you to Google and do a bit of research on the specifics of a WordPress feature or API that you need to customize to bring your plugin idea to life. Okay, so the whole point of these 3 chapters is to give you a rock solid foundation to build upon. And I think it's going to be a ton of fun. Now, in our very next lesson, we're going to get started. We'll be starting with the traditional PHP chapter. So just sort of creating a new plugin, maybe creating an admin menu, so on and so forth. I'm excited to jump into this with you. Let's keep things rolling, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to create our first plugin. Now, before we worry about making our plugin do anything that's actually useful or complex, let's first just learn the basics of how and where to create a plugin in the first place. So in this video, let's imagine our goal is to create a plugin that dynamically adds an extra sentence at the end of a blog post detail screen. So if I go into this single post, so imagine we want our plugin to dynamically add an extra sentence at the end of a blog post. That's our goal in this video. Okay, and then once we're familiar with just creating a super basic plugin, then we can learn how to do actually useful things. So do this with me. Let's go create a new folder for a new plugin. At this point in the course, you know how to find the folder with your WordPress installation in it. So this would be where there's the folder called WP Content. Let's look inside WP Content. And then there will be a folder named Plugins. Let's go inside the Plugins folder. Okay, and then just create a brand new folder for this plugin that we're about to create. So new folder, you can name it whatever you'd like, but give it a unique name that you don't think any other plugin has ever used before. So for example, I will name it Our First Unique Plugin. Okay, then go ahead and open this up in VS Code or your text editor of choice. Next, let's create a new PHP file in this folder. You can name this file after the folder name for your plugin. So for example, you could call it Our First Unique Plugin.php. But it will also work if you just name this just about anything. You could name it test.php, but just as a best practice, you could give it a relevant name to your plugin folder as well. So that's what I'll go with. Now inside this file, let's open up PHP. And then right after that opening line, let's jump into a comment. So /*, and then down on a new line, you can close out of the comment with */. Now in between that, right about here, we can just start giving WordPress a little bit of info about our plugin. So we can say plugin name, colon, and then you can name it whatever you want. Let's call it our test plugin. Now, while this can be whatever you want, this does need to be exactly plugin name, right? This is an attribute that WordPress is looking for. We can also give it a quick description. A truly amazing plugin. We can say that it's version, let's go with 1.0. We can say who the author is. You can add a link to your website or the plugin's website by saying author URI colon, and then just paste in a URL. Okay, and for now, that's all of the properties that we need. In the future, we'll learn about how to make our plugin easy to translate into other languages. And when we get to that, we will circle back and add a few additional properties in this comment section. For now, though, let's just go ahead and save this file. And then back in WordPress, if we go into the admin dashboard, and then in the sidebar, look for plugins. Well, now in this list of plugins, we see our test plugin. And there's the description, there's the version number, and there's the author. So, just like any other plugin, let's go ahead and activate it. Now, we activated our plugin, but our plugin doesn't do anything yet. So, let's actually add a bit of useful code now. So remember, in this video, we just want to dynamically add a sentence to the very end of a blog post for the permalink or single view of posts. So here's how we can do that. Right below this, let's add a filter. So add filter. Be sure to have a semicolon after we call that. And then we're just going to give it two arguments here. So A comma B as placeholders. The first argument, instead of this A placeholder, would be quotes, the underscore content. WordPress has all sorts of different filters that we can hook onto. This one is aptly named. I think you can guess what it's going to do. It's going to allow us to filter or change the content for a post. So for the second argument, we just give it a function. You could include an inline or anonymous function here, but instead, just to stay organized, right below this, we could create a named function. Give it whatever name you want. Let's go with add to end of post, parentheses, curly brackets. Now a quick note that I want to add about function names here is that you do want to choose function names that won't conflict with other plugins or even the core of WordPress itself. So for right now, be sure to choose a unique name. However, I do want to let you know that in a future lesson, I will show you how to use classes in PHP, and this will allow us to avoid that issue of having to choose super unique function names. But we need to learn how to walk before we can run, so we'll get to that later. Anyways, for now, let's adjust this line. So instead of B, we would just give it a reference to our function. So quotes, I named it add to end of post. You might have named it something different. Just make sure it lines up. Okay, now in our function definition, in these parentheses, we do want to receive a parameter. So let's say $content. Now inside the body of this function, we can use the incoming content, and we can use that to create a new string of text that we return. So for example, return. Now we don't want to return just literally the exact same version of the blog post content. Instead, we would want to return that plus, so we could use a period to concatenate on something else. And let's just add on a string of text, so quotes, and maybe let's add on an HTML paragraph that says, my name is Brad. You could use your name. Let's give this a save and test it out. So if I go back to the front end of my site and view a blog post detail screen, cool, down at the bottom we see my name is Brad. Now just to make it clear how this is working, if you removed $content and the dot here and you just returned that string of text, that's all you would see. So the idea is content is the content that's actually being stored in the database for that real blog post, and then you can use that to create whatever string you want to create. And then you just return that as a whole, and that's what WordPress is going to use when your front-end template calls the content. Let me put that back, refresh, Cool. One last thing that I do want to cover in this video is what if we only wanted to add this extra sentence on a detail view for a blog post? For example, if you had other pages that use the content to display the content, maybe you don't want to use this filter everywhere. So a common technique here would just be to wrap this line within an if statement. So within our function, here's what I would do. Take this return line and cut it into your clipboard. And then I would just write an if statement. I would say if, parentheses, curly brackets, for the condition, I would say if is underscore single, parentheses to call it, and, so double ampersand, and only if this is the main query. So is main query, parentheses to call that. So this is just my way of saying only if you're on a single screen for a post, and only if it's the main query, because sometimes a template might load or loop through other secondary posts, maybe down in the footer or in the sidebar. So this is just saying only for the main or primary post for this URL. So in the if block, you could just paste back in your clipboard. And then if this is not true, we would just want to return content without manipulating it at all. Now we don't even really need an else block here. A function will end as soon as you return something. So if this is true, this will end from this return. So then below this if statement, we can just return $content, right? If this is not the case. So we can go ahead and save that, and it's going to work just the same. If you really wanted to be able to test things to see if that conditional logic is working, you could try, instead of is single, is page. So is single will work for any detail screen for any post type except for page and attachment. So if I say is page, this is going to be false. So if I refresh, we no longer see the bonus sentence. But if you went to a individual page, right? So if I went to the About Us page, now we do see my name is Brad. Cool. So really that's all a plugin is. You're leveraging the different action hooks and filter hooks that WordPress makes available to us. Trust me, there are so many different actions and filters that we can leverage that you can customize WordPress in just about any way you can imagine. This was just a quick example to get your first plugin up and running, but now that we're familiar with these basics, we can try to do something more useful. So, in our very next lesson, let's begin building the post statistics or word count plugin. Right, we saw this in the previous video where it shows you how many words the current post has, how many characters it has, and about how long it will take to read. I think building something a bit more useful and real world like this should be a lot of fun and should be a great learning experience. Let's keep things rolling, and I'll see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to create an admin settings page. Let's jump right into the action. So this is a preview of the finished product of what we're trying to build right now. We want to create a plugin that shows the word count, character count, and the approximate read time for a post. However, a big part of what plugins do isn't just the feature that they bring to the table, but it's also letting the user adjust settings and preferences. So, for example, what if the owner of this site, they wanted the word count and they wanted the read time, but maybe they did not want the character count? Well, this is where a plugin settings screen or an admin settings screen comes into play. So again, this is a preview of the finished product that we're going to build together, but if I jump into the admin dashboard and look under settings, there's something called word count with various settings, and the site owner could just uncheck this box for character count, hit save changes, and if you refresh on the front end, we no longer see the character count. So all of that is to say that before we worry about actually counting the words and how long it would take to read and the character count, and even before we learn how to save the user's preferences into a database, let's first just worry about adding a settings or admin page at all. Right? So our very first task is simply to learn how to add a link in the admin settings menu to a new custom page that we are creating. So right now, let me switch over to this tab where I do not have the finished product, and we can start to move forward together. Let's pick up where we left off in the previous lesson. So we already had a new plugin folder opened up in VS Code. And inside our only file, let's keep the comment and the opening PHP tag, but everything below the comments, let's delete all of this and give ourselves a clean slate. Let's begin by adding an action. So add action, semicolon. The name of the action that we want to hook onto is admin_menu. And then the second argument is just a function that we give it. So we need to create a unique function name that hasn't been used by any other plugin or by WordPress itself. Now, a bit later in this video, once we've actually set up the settings page link, we can talk about PHP classes, and that will allow us to avoid this coming up with unique function names challenge. But for now, let's just come up with a unique name. Let's name it Our Plugin Settings Link. Okay, now let's create a function with that exact matching name. So function Our Plugin Settings Link, parentheses, curly brackets. Okay, and now inside the body of this function, what do we want to do? Well, remember, our goal right now is to add a new page or link inside the WordPress admin settings menu. Right, we want a new option to appear somewhere in here. So, within our new function, we would just say add underscore options underscore page. Be sure to include a semicolon. Okay, and now inside these parentheses, we need to give this 5 arguments. So I'll just include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as placeholders. And now let's talk about what we need to include here. The first argument is the title of the page that we want to create. So for example, this would be used in the actual tab in your browser, just the overall document title. So why don't we say quotes word count settings. Okay. The second argument is the text or title for the page that will be used in the settings menu. Now you'll notice there's not very much horizontal space here to fit too many words. So maybe instead of word count settings, for this, let's just say word count. Okay, the third argument has to do with permissions or capabilities. So this is basically saying what capability does the user need to have in order to see this page. So this gets into user roles and permissions. Do you want only your admins to be able to see this page? Do you want your editors, your average users? It's up to you, but I just want sort of administrative users to see this page. So for this third argument, I'm going to say quotes, manage underscore options. So only if the current user has permissions to change options in WordPress should they be able to see this page. Okay, the fourth argument is sort of the slug or short name for this new page. And even if we're going to be using PHP classes a bit later in this video, we still need this short name or slug to be unique. Essentially, this is what will be used at the end of the URL for our new settings page. So why don't we just say maybe word count settings page. Okay, and then the fifth and final argument is just a function that we give it, and it will be that function's job to actually output the HTML content that we want on the new page. So for now, let's just make up a unique new function name. I will call it Our Settings Page HTML. Okay, and then let's just go create a function with that matching name. So function Our Settings Page HTML, parentheses, curly brackets. Okay, and then in this function, instead of actually returning with the keyword return and then a string of text, instead of that, here's what we're going to do. Right after this opening curly bracket here, let's drop out of PHP. And then right before this closing curly bracket here, let's drop back into PHP. So then right here, we can just include regular traditional HTML. Now a bit later, we can set up real HTML that will look nice. But for now, just as a quick test, let's say hello world from our new plugin. Let's give this a save and test it out. So within our admin dashboard, just hit reload or refresh, and then let's scroll down, look in the settings menu, and there we see word count. And if we click on it, there we see that HTML, hello world from our new plugin, and also notice up in the tab for your browser, you see the full title, right? Word count settings. Now, before we start to add a bit of real HTML here, Let's first address the challenge of having to come up with super unique function names. Because I don't know about you, but having to come up with names like our plugin settings link and our settings page HTML, that's not an enjoyable process for me, right? Having to come up with these really long names to make sure that they're unique and that no other plugin and that WordPress itself isn't already using it, that can be a time waster, and also it's just difficult to keep typing these names out throughout your code. It would be nice if we could use names for our functions that are a lot simpler. So this is where PHP classes can help us out. So let me show you what I would do. Right above this first add action line, so just right below the comments, let's add a new line and say class, that's lowercase, and then we make up a name. Now the class name does need to be unique itself, but the nice thing is that inside the class, none of the properties or methods need to have unique names. We'll see this in just a moment, but let's come up with a class name. How about word count and time plugin? Okay, now when you're creating a class, you do not have parentheses right after this like you would with a function. Instead, we just begin with curly brackets. Let's drop down. Okay, now inside here, this is where we sort of create a blueprint for an object. Okay, but then below this, we would want to instantiate or create a new instance of this class. So just right here below the curly brackets, let's say new instance of word count and time plugin, in parentheses to actually use the class, semicolon as well. Now this would work with the new object just sort of floating in outer space, but let me show you what I like to do. At the very beginning of this line, let's create a new variable, and let's just name it this exact same thing, but start it with a lowercase letter. So word count and time plugin equals. So $ for a variable. This way, if any other plugins need to remove one of our actions or filters, they can actually get access to our functions or methods that live inside our class, right? They could use this variable and then look inside it. At this point, let's circle back to what should go inside our actual class right here. So in PHP, anytime you create a new instance from a class, PHP will automatically call the function inside the class that is named __ construct. So let's create that function right now. So inside this class, function __ construct, parentheses, curly brackets. And now there's no one right or wrong way to set up a class, but what I like to do is include any of sort of the top level actions or filters that we're adding. I like to include those in the constructor. So let's just cut and paste this add action line. Let's cut this to live inside our new construct function. So right here. Okay, so now when we create our new instance from this blueprint, this code will automatically run. So now it's just a matter of moving our other functions to live inside our class. So just select or cut and paste these two functions. Cut those, and now just add them right after the constructor, right? So right after this function, but still in the class. So paste right here. Okay, and now we can sort of circle back to the whole reason we're even setting up a class in the first place. Now we can have a very simple name for this. So instead of this really long name of our plugin settings link, imagine if instead we just wanted this function to be named admin page. So we can just change that here, admin page. Okay, and now the question is, how do you reference that up here? It's not as simple as just changing this to admin page. Instead, we need to use the callable syntax in PHP. So here's what we do. get rid of this second argument here entirely, and in its place we give it an array. So array parentheses, and we're going to give the array two arguments. So a comma b as a placeholder. The first argument is an object. So in this case, we just want to point towards this class itself, or this current instance of the class. So we'd say $this. Okay, and then the second argument is just the actual name of your method. So that would be quotes admin page. Now the whole idea here is that you could name this something very generic. You don't need to worry about this creating a conflict with other plugins or with WordPress. So we can name this something short, generic, easy to type. We don't need to worry about that conflict issue. Let's do the same thing with this function. Why don't we change its name to just be our HTML? Okay, so we changed the actual function name. Then on this line, towards the end of it, where we are referencing that function, again, we would just get rid of this argument. Instead of a string of text, we would give it an array. Give it two arguments inside the array. The first is just $this, right? We're just sort of working with our class. And then the second argument would be quotes our HTML. Okay, let's go ahead and save this and test it out. So if I refresh, cool, everything works exactly the same, only now we don't need to come up with these really long, unique names for our functions or methods. Cool, now before we bring this lesson to a close, let's adjust the actual HTML really quick, just so that it sort of looks like a real settings page. So let's get rid of this hello world, and instead I would begin with a div, sort of a wrapper div, and give it a class.
Hold on, let me understand this. Literally understand this. So it adds an admin menu, and the admin menu is called admin page. This is called the admin page, and then a function comes in that calls out to the admin page. And the admin page it calls out for it defines a new I don't even know what to call this, but it it defines something new, and then we gotta use that new thing in our next function. Alright, so let me get this straight. It adds an action, it adds an admin menu, and the admin menu is the admin page. This is the admin page, and the admin page is called the word count settings. It's something you can manage options there, and this is the slug. And this uses our HTML, and the HTML function outputs the HTML.
Class of wrap. We don't need to To write any CSS for this, WordPress will already take care of that on its own. Now inside this wrapper div, let's just create maybe a heading level 1. Again, WordPress will sort of already have styling for that H1. And let's say word count settings. Okay, and for now, that's all we really need. Let's go ahead and give that a save. And if we refresh, cool, you can see that gives us a bit of standardized spacing, a bit of standardized typography, and this is starting to look like a real settings page. Now let's circle back to what we're going to cover in the next video. Remember, the whole point of this page is to let the site owner customize their settings and preferences with regards to the word count statistics. So a look at the finished product. We want to create a form that looks like this. This looks identical to a default WordPress settings screen with sort of the 2 columns and then the signature blue Save Changes button. So that's what we're going to begin doing in the next lesson, adding a form right here together. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the Settings API in WordPress. Let's jump right into the action. So currently, this is what our settings page looks like. This area where we would want a form is currently empty. Now remember, this is the finished product of what we want it to look like. And in terms of moving forward here, I think the best way to understand things is to actually look at the end and then work backwards. What I mean by that is our real goal here is just to permanently save the user's preferences into the database. So let's begin by looking at the WordPress database and seeing where it stores settings and option values. So how do we look at our database? Well, if you're using the local WP or local by Flywheel application, just click on the current site that you're running. And then in this area, you'll see a database tab. You can click on. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the Settings API in WordPress. Let's jump right into the action. So currently, this is what our settings page looks like. This area where we would want a form is currently empty. Now remember, this is the finished product of what we want it to look like. And in terms of moving forward here, I think the best way to understand things is to actually look at the end and then work backwards. What I mean by that is our real goal here is just to permanently save the user's preferences into the database. So let's begin by looking at the WordPress database and seeing where it stores settings and option values. So how do we look at our database? Well, if you're using the local WP or local by Flywheel application, just click on the current site that you're running. And then in this area, you'll see a database tab. You can click on that and then just click on this Open Adminer button. Once you click on that, it should open a new tab that looks something like this. And this is the database for your WordPress website. Over here, we see the different tables. The one that I want to draw our attention to right now, though, is called Options. So let's click onto that Options table. And then instead of just showing the structure for the table, let's click this Select Data link. Cool. So this is where WordPress stores all of your preferences, your settings, and options. It's pretty simple. This column, option name, you can just look through these and it's self-explanatory, right? Your site URL, the name of your site, the description, and if you scroll through this list, you'll see that most of them are a little bit self-explanatory. And then this column is just the value. So really all we're trying to do with our plugin right now is just create a new row in this database table, right? So instead of site URL or blog name or blog description, we would want a new row where the option name is perhaps display location for word count, or word count show word count, or word count show character count, or word count show read time, right? We're just trying to create a new option, and then in the value column, this option underscore value, that's where we would just store, for example, whatever the user types in here, their preferences for each of these fields. So that is our end goal. From here, we're just going to sort of work backwards and see how we get here, right? How do we end up getting the user's preferences from an HTML form? How do we get from the form into the actual database? So let's jump back to our empty example where we're going to build things together, and let's get started. Let's jump back into our text editor, and within the construct function in our class, let's just add a new action. So right here, let's say add action. Be sure to include the semicolon, and the name of the action hook is admin underscore init. Okay, comma. The second argument, well, we haven't created a new function yet, but let's just point towards a function, or I should say a method, and then we can create it in about 10 seconds from now. So an array, the first argument is $this, comma, the second argument, well, we just get to make up a simple name for the method. I'll call it settings. Okay, now let's just create a function with that name. So right below the constructor function, we can just say function settings, parentheses, curly brackets. And now let's talk about what I want to do in this function. So before we worry at all about the HTML that we're going to output for the form, we first just need to register the settings or the fields, right, that we want to store in the database. So within here, let's use the WordPress function called register underscore setting. Okay, inside these parentheses, we're going to give it 3 arguments. So 1, 2, 3 as placeholders. Okay, now we're going to use this register setting function once for each of the options. So you can see overall we're going to have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options. So ultimately we're going to use this 5 times, but for now let's just register the very first setting, which will be the display location, right? Do you want the word count post statistics to be at the start of the post or at the end of the post? Okay, so let's talk about these 3 arguments. The first argument is actually the name of the group that this setting belongs to. So let's call it, you could call it anything, but let's call it maybe word count plugin. We'll see where this name comes into play a little bit later in the video. Let's move on though. So this second argument, this is the actual name for this specific setting. Right, so in terms of asking the user the display location, do you want it at the beginning or the end? You could name this anything you want, but maybe I'll name it WCP. I'm just making this.
He's 16.
up, short for word count plugin. And then maybe underscore location. Okay. The third argument is an array with several different options. So let's give it an array. Okay, and then inside this array, we want to give it two properties, a sanitize callback, so how we want to either sanitize or validate the value, and then also a default value. So if no value exists in the database yet, what do we want to sort of consider the standard or default answer to be? So let's just say quotes sanitize underscore callback, and then the arrow symbol, right? So equal sign greater than.
I'm busy, man. What? You were here, dude. Silly cat.
And let's just set that to underscore sanitize underscore text underscore field. Okay, then have a comma, and then we just need one more property, which is default and arrow symbol. And let's just say that it has a default value of 0, right? So you could store anything you want in the database, right? If we look at the options table again, you can store a string of text, you can store a serialized array. So we can store whatever we want for that option. We could store a string of text that says display at the beginning or display at the end. But in terms of being efficient and not storing more data than we need, I would probably just, with our own logic, say that 0 can mean display at the beginning and a value of 1 can mean display at the end. But that's totally personal preference.
Yeah.
Also, before we move on, I do want to let you know that this value
off the ground. Stupid cat.
Of sanitized text field. This is just a standard function in WordPress that will sanitize a user's input value for us. It's sort of a generic WordPress sanitize tool that I like to use. In our next video, we'll learn how we can supply a custom function name here and write our own sanitize function. So not only for sanitization, but if we want to validate an option, right? For example, what if we want to make sure that the number is only 0 or 1 and that the user doesn't somehow enter 2 or a word? So we can learn more about sort of custom validation in the next video. But for now, this just gives us sort of the baked in standard WordPress sanitization. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of this line. So we've registered our setting. So this gives WordPress the info that it would need to store a value in the database. But now we need to tie things back in to our HTML form.
Turn off chat box. Keep forgetting this shit on top left corner. Man. Is it in the friend list? Oh, yeah, cool. Chat. Notifications. I really thought I turned this off before. There we go.
So let's do this. Right above this register setting line, let's add a new line and say add underscore settings underscore field. Semicolon here. Now the job of this function
Ridiculous. Oh well. Activate a product. I agree. Finish. 51 gigs, dude. Are you kidding me, dude? Oh man. Let me see where I got space for that. Oh man, that's a lot of fucking space. What do I have in here? What? It's frustrating. Imagine fucking not telling me what fucking phone you're bringing, dude. Like fucking AIDS. Sorry.